Michela, Giordano, Castro. What a wonderful conversation with Michela. Religious trauma. What do you think of it when you hear that? The difference between being religious and being spiritual. I think I opened a conversation with Michela with that. Growing up in a strict Christian household, moved to Italy when she was 8. Her father became a pastor there, moved there for a couple of years, then came back to the States. And the father had doubts and went through different modes of Christianity, out of Christianity, into different areas. Now she helps people that have religious trauma. But her story is an incredible one. And I wonder if it's something that you're familiar with. But we go deep into it. The term blisscipline, bliss and discipline, never heard it before. She talks about it. And then, of course, her view on discipline itself is interesting. But a wonderful conversation, wonderful insight from Michela on what she went through and how she deals with it, and now she helps others with it. Thanks so much for listening and watching. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because I was working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Time today. Michela, Giordano, Castro. What is the difference, Michela, between being spiritual and being religious?
I believe the difference between being spiritual and being religious is your openness, with religion. And I do have a history with religion. There is something you are following. And usually there are some constraints around that of what is right, what is wrong. Now, this doesn't mean you can't come up to some of that on your own in spirituality, but spirituality is more the act of connecting with something supernatural or finding something that supports you beyond the material. And that can be found within religion as well. But to be spiritual and not religious, just to me, means that you don't have any set bounds on what that looks like. You can again determine that for yourself, but it's not determined externally from you, if that makes sense.
In this fast-paced MSP landscape, how do you stay ahead? Introducing MSPinfluencer.com, your ultimate hub for MSP news, insights, and community connection, powered by Forza Dash. More than 75,000 MSPs subscribe to our MSP Influencer Pulse weekly newsletter, staying informed and ahead of industry trends. Tune in to emerging podcasts from Joey Pinz and leading MSP voices, offering essential tips, powerful insights, and success stories. Explore our multi-authored blogs, crafted specifically for MSP leaders, delivering fresh perspectives and actionable strategies. Celebrate excellence with the industry-leading Forza-MSP Influencer Awards, recognizing innovation, leadership, and impact in the MSP community. Join thousands of MSP professionals who trust MSPinfluencer.com to grow their business and expand their networks. MSPinfluencer.com, where today's MSP leaders connect, collaborate, and conquer, all powered by the Forza Dash platform, helping MSP vendors work effectively with MSPs and helping MSPs grow. Are sports spiritual? Watching sports, following sports?
That's a great question. It's funny you asked that question because I was just actually watching something that was comparing sports to an old Roman, I forget the name of it, but like conqueror saying of like, give them bread and circuses and they will let anything the government wants to do, be done. And someone was comparing that to sports recently. And I think there is some truth in that, but there could be comparisons with that with all kinds of things, of course. Um, Sports do allow people to connect beyond themselves, to identify with a group. In a way, I would honestly compare it a little bit more to religion, though, because there
Hmm.
is the concept of like my team and versus your team.
Hmm.
There is more of those
Competition.
constraints. Yeah, but there are the elements of unity within it, which again can be found in religion too.
So does spirituality always have to deal with a higher being?
Not necessarily. It's interesting because, even like for myself with my path in spirituality,
Yeah.
what I'm finding is that this higher being that we have all kinds of names for
Right.
is, in my understanding, within each and every one of us. So it's kind of a yes and no answer because it is beyond us in a sense, but also found within us. So the answer could be no. It doesn't have to be any kind of higher being. It could even be a matter of connecting to like a deeper, authentic version of yourself, which interestingly is a concept in internal family systems therapy. I am a therapist, so obviously I'm very interested in spirituality and all of that. And I do
Yes.
coaching there and all of that. But I am a therapist trained in, practicing therapy. And my favorite modality is internal family systems therapy. This was actually part of my reconnection to spirituality after leaving religion and living as a very spiritually disinterested agnostic for 10 years.
Yes.
Being trained in IFS, which is shown to be evidence based, very effective for trauma, also healing eating disorders, which are notoriously difficult to
Hmm.
come out of. And it involves this concept that we all have parts, but we also all have self energy. And if we can help our parts and connect to our self energy, that's where so much of the healing happens, the shifts happen. We become more of who we want to be versus continuing in these behaviors that we don't actually want to be doing.
Hmm. Seems to me, Michaela, there's a right and wrong way to do religion, but there's not a right and wrong way to do spirituality.
Hmm, that's an interesting observation. Honestly, I even struggle with the idea of right and wrong
Ah.
nowadays. Of course, I recognize that there are behaviors or practices that, are harmful or not harmful. But lately, I've been kind of leaning more into the big picture. And
Hmm.
my belief is that, we all have a soul. Ultimately, all of our souls are part of, the oneness. But we're all on our own journey and we're all going to get there in the end. And unfortunately, you know, in our short term perspective, we may cause more harm or face more struggles before we get there or get closer to that oneness of love and, I want to say goodness, but even that some people argue. um, but yeah, as far as right or wrong way to do religion, I will say you can practice religion and practice spirituality, but even
Hmm.
researchers have noticed the difference that you can be religious and not spiritual. There's oh, it's been a while. I'm blanking on the terms, but they have created terms for practicing religion with spirituality, which involves it's an inner relationship. It's a practice you do even if nobody's watching. It's not performative. Spirituality is something you turn to for support in times of need, whereas religiosity is more about following the rules, sometimes more performative. But even if it's not performative, it's just coming from this place of like fear and I need to do this or this is what's right, just very harsh. That's more of the religion, and that's not including the spirituality aspect.
Hmm. But then we get into, Michaela, cults, right? Where there's actual malice involved. And perhaps
Mm.
that can be an ambiguous term too. But when there's actual harm to people and, spirituality and religion still takes place there because many cults believe that they're spiritual and, they use these terms as well. And whether you and I don't think it's healthy because it's harmful to others. When I say harmful, I mean, actual death, suicide, mass suicides, and homicide, things like this.
Hmm.
Uh, those all take place there too.
Yeah. You know, what I see to be, the catalyst of harm
Hmm.
versus something positive is fear. And unfortunately,
Hmm.
what might start as something good and, maybe not, but ultimately turn into a cult for situations that are culty or are actual cults, what I believe causes the harm to start to perpetuate is fear. So many cults historically have been obsessed with like doomsday kind of theology of like the end of times, and that that was even a catalyst for mass suicides within cults. Also, the fear of, again, that right or wrong. So if someone within the cult is doing quote unquote wrong, becoming shamed, becoming ostracized. The cult itself being the result of believing other people are wrong and fearing, becoming like them versus doing what should be done or is better, and separating ourselves from the world. That's what a cult is. You're
Hmm.
separate in some ways. You're following a charismatic leader. So I think it's the fear that's the problem.
Yeah, there's definitely fear there. And okay, so let's walk through this a little bit. So you're born in a Christian house. Your father wanted to go back. He wanted to go back to Italy, to of course Sicily, to open up a church there, but then decided, and I don't want to, but it's quite a journey, and to bring you to where you are now. Let's talk about that, the beginning stages there, where you grew up in a completely Christian household and community.
Hmm. Yeah, I grew up, going to church every Sunday. When I was 8 years old, we moved to Italy, so my dad could be the pastor of the local church. And in Italy, Catholicism is the thing. And it's
Yes.
gotten better over the years, but especially in the past, there was this huge divide between Christianity and Catholicism. Nowadays we kind of think of it sort of as the same. Like, we know there's differences, but yeah, there was like a lot of stigma and these different things. So, my dad in his, younger years had been trained in Florence, Italy, in the north, in the Bible, and he always wanted to give back to his community down in the south in Sicily. And my grandma wasn't doing well with her health, so we decided that was the time we moved to Italy. We were there a couple years. He was the pastor. We would do mission work. American high schoolers would come for their mission trip and
Nice.
different things like this. Um, and eventually we moved back to the States, back to our home church here. And we started going to church even more. Pretty much every time the doors were open, we were there, involved in all the activities, youth group, camps, etc. And also, my mom decided to start homeschooling us. So, I'd been to private school in elementary school, but then we started homeschooling, and we got more involved in local organizations that were very Christian based as well. And so, I was home some days and at these churches where people, different teachers, different either moms or just people who made a career were teaching us, but from the basis of a biblical worldview. So everything we were learning was through the lens of the Bible is completely true. And that was very perpetuated as well. And then when I was 16, you know, I was actually fasting that day because within my spiritual journey was also interesting because my dad is a very curious person, and he had some time on his hands because of how he, worked things out with his job and all that. But he would do a lot of research. And so within Christianity, there was all this research done trying to figure out, the right way to live, etc. This was actually how I ended up being baptized the first time, which is kind of funny to say because there was a second. But, while we were living in Italy, he was convicted by a passage that talked about, if you follow Jesus, you and your household, need to be baptized, something that gave that message. And so, I was told, like, we're a Christian, like, you need to be baptized. I didn't want to do it because I was feeling like, I should be feeling something, or I don't
Mm.
know.
Mm.
But, we did that. So me and my sister were baptized. My brother had already been. But then later, when I was 11, I had my own personal experience that caused me to be very convicted for God, like very on fire for God. I felt like God like intervened in my life and helped me have faith, because I was actually going through a pretty dark time when we moved back. I was very lonely, we were being
Move back to the
homeschooled. I was
States.
back to the States. Yeah. I was like an outsider at church because I'd been gone for so long, and church was like my only socialization, before we started all those classes. And I was really doubting God. And yeah, I had this experience that I felt like God helped me out. Like, God is real, and this is like the best thing ever. So I was all in with religion and spirituality, I will say. But and so yeah, as my dad would do his research, we actually made some pretty big changes. At one point, we stopped going to church because, his studies led him to believe that home church is more biblical. You're more closely knit with the other people. You can support each other better. All this money isn't going to a building. You can actually use it to feed the widows and
Mm.
orphans, etc.
Mm.
So we did that for a while. And then he was led to Messianic Judaism,
Right.
because, the argument there, like, Jesus was never a Christian, Jesus was a Jew. So
Mm.
we became Messianic Jews. We were going to the synagogue, celebrating all the old festivals and honoring the Sabbath. So one Sabbath I was fasting, which was my own decision. And I walk into the living room, seeing what, the family's up to. My dad's talking, and again, he's Italian and he was a preacher, so he's a big talker. It was nothing new that he's standing passionately talking about something while somebody's sitting on the couch, like, listening, or maybe not. And my mom was there, and I sat down, and I picked up that he was communicating that he was atheist, that he didn't believe in God. And I literally could not believe my ears. Like, I was like, how are my ears malfunctioning to this degree? I was so confused. And I wasn't fazed by that. Like, of course I was shocked, but it didn't shake my faith. I was like, well, you're wrong, and I'm going to prove you wrong. Because
Mm.
another part of my education was apologetics, which is the defense of the Christian faith, trying to prove it to be true. So, for years, we would have all these debates, all these conversations. And I really fought for my faith because I was so trained to believe that this is how you can live a happy life. Like, people without religion, without Christianity in particular, I was taught, are secretly miserable inside.
Mm.
This is the only way you can have joy and peace. Like, if you don't have God to depend on, why on earth would you have peace? Different things like this. And so I really wanted to keep it. Plus, it was my whole community. I was getting ready to go to college, of course, not of course, but, when I was 18. And, I still really wanted to be Christian, and I was only looking at Christian schools, but also because that's what most everyone in my community was doing. I was around all these homeschooled Christians. But eventually it got to the point where I was like, I can't fight this anymore. Like, I just have to accept, I do not believe in this God. I do not believe in this Bible. Because, he would give me arguments and get me to consider things that usually I wasn't exposed to.
Hmm.
But beyond that, what actually made the biggest difference for me was really letting myself go there with the thought of, God is omnipotent. He is all powerful. He's all loving. I truly believe that God is love. And yet I was also taught that if you don't believe in him and believe in Jesus as God, you would go to hell and burn for forever, for eternity. And I went to Istanbul, Turkey, when we were visiting Italy when I was 17. We had a layover there, and we decided to stay for a couple days. And so this was my first time in a non-Christian nation.
Hmm.
I mean, people can argue America's a Christian nation, but the primary religion is Christianity. And I'd done other traveling, but most other countries were Catholic based, at their
Mm.
foundation. So I was in a country with all these mosques, all majority of people, if not everyone, there was Muslim.
Right.
And we even visited the temple, and I saw how, or the mosque, I saw how dedicated these people were,
Mm. Mm.
how much faith they had, how convicted they were that what they had was true. And in my head, I'm like, if I grew up here, I would be in their shoes. It would be the same situation for me. I'd be a
Mm.
Muslim. And realizing that, and then just thinking deeper on like people who might never even hear the gospel, quote unquote, the gospel. Like, this can't be true. God can't be all loving and all powerful and let this happen. And so, the combination of all these things, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. It was very painful for me because I was also very conditioned that this is the only thing that's right. People who are spiritual outside of religion, outside of Christianity, they're basically dumb. They don't know what they're doing, or it's
Mm.
demonic. And I didn't really believe it was demonic, but I just thought it was dumb, honestly. Like, I
Mm.
would hear about people talking about the universe, and that was so hard for me to wrap my mind around because I was so used to talking about God, like this personal figure, and the universe was so impersonal to me. And so I just felt
Mm.
very disconnected from that. I thought it made no sense. And it was so painful for me to let go of religion that I just closed myself off to spirituality. I had a lot of unprocessed anger and grief, and I didn't really address it. And so it took me 10 years to just slowly process all of that. Whereas I do believe with intentional healing work, it can be done much faster. But I didn't have any of that. I didn't even know about deconstruction. And this is like a really popular term right now, around people who are kind of breaking down the Christian faith. Some people remain Christian, but more open minded. There are a lot of people who even use the Bible as a spiritual tool and believe in God and Jesus, but don't believe in hell, even according to interpretations of the Bible now. So there's a lot that can come from deconstruction. But
Mm.
I was just doing this on my own. And yet I was also at a very strict Christian college where there was chapel every morning, Bible every semester, all these rules, to keep people, pure and good Christians and all this stuff. So yeah, I was just very internalized. So it took me a long time to come out of, but that's kind of my religion story.
Yeah, and through all of that, and I've heard you speak about it, Michaela, and you know, there was eventually separation with your father, and there was try to reconciliation. There was a divorce, and tried to come back. But at this point, you're so frustrated. You're not. You don't. Well, last I heard, anyway, you weren't giving that back. By the way, have you ever read the Poisonwood Bible, Barbara
Poison
Kingsolver?
Wood Bible?
Yeah,
I haven't heard of that.
fiction. It's just a fiction book called The Poisonwood
Mm,
Bible by Kingsolver. Anyway, when I was hearing your story, I kept thinking of
mhm,
this book.
mm.
American father goes to Africa to do missionary. Anyway, but wonderful. I recommend if you're in a fiction mood. Might be too close to home, but so now you get all of this, you get all that background. So to this day, are you Christian?
I do not identify as Christian. Um, it's a
What is
valid question.
define
Sorry.
Christianity? Define Christian.
Okay. Yeah. So, you know, my it's hard because different people will say different things. And
I know
that's
they
one of the
will.
things about Christianity. That's why there's so
Yeah.
much division. People will say they're not actually Christian. But, my definition of Christianity, because of my past, I will say, is someone who, believes that Jesus is God, but only Jesus as far as humans go. And I do know Christians now that don't believe in hell, but I have to admit, I have my biases. For me, if I call myself Christian, I I assume people will likely believe that I believe you're going to hell if you don't believe in Jesus as God and repent for your sins. And that's another thing I would define Christianity with, is this belief in sin in belief that,
Hmm.
there is this right and wrong that can separate us from God. So, again, I know Christians now who don't believe in hell. I'm not sure how they navigate the idea of sin, but another interesting fact is that, reincarnation used to be, a normal part of Christianity until I think like the 17 something, changes were made to the Bible. Um, so I suppose someone could be Christian and also not see sin as some like damning action. But again, I see Christianity as, you believe in Jesus as being God. Only Jesus is God. You have to believe in him in order to enter heaven. And only Jesus is like your emotional support as you get through this life.
Gandhi has a great quote, something like, I love your Jesus, but I don't really like your Christians, or something like that. But it's interesting when I
Mm-hmm.
ask about Christianity, you talk about Jesus, but then you talk about hell and you talk about sin. Why not talk about love? Why not talk about heaven? Why not talk about? It's interesting how you go to hell and sin.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. And I would say, and it's also interesting because my experience of Christianity
Right.
wasn't focused on those things. It really wasn't. Like, I
Really?
never feared hell. Even like before I was baptized, or I did have some concern for others. I will say, like I remember like a family member who wasn't doing well with their health, and I didn't see them live for God. They would call themselves Christians, but I didn't see them as living for God, and I did worry about, their soul.
Wow.
Um and I did want to be a missionary because I thought, the only good use of life is to glorify God, and I did care about people. So like, this glorifies God and helps people, like I want to be a missionary. Um but yeah, that's why I don't call myself Christian, because even now, honestly, as my path of spirituality has unfolded, I am more connected to Jesus, you could say. Even the idea of, the Holy Spirit. There's
Hmm.
this book, A Course in Miracles, that has really been influencing me lately. It's really been really helping me in many ways. And there's even a class I attend on Tuesdays on it. And it talks about, God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, but it puts it all in a framework that is so different
Hmm.
than what religion teaches. Yet I don't call myself a Christian because, yeah, like that's that's my understanding, and I think a lot of people's is that if you're Christian, you believe in sin, you believe in hell. It's not even the truth anymore, but it's why I don't attach to that label.
Hmm. And also, Michaela, I heard you say that you're part of these things, knowing them telling you right out that you could never be a preacher, right? Because you're female, you could never do these kind. So my mother became a Jehovah's Witness when I was 11 or 12. So
Mm.
a very literal acceptance of the Bible. Very nice people. Uh, I was never baptized, but what I took away from it, of course, being a privileged male, by the way, is one, public speaking. I got up in front of the church and I spoke, and so now I love it. I mean, so I'm very different. Kind of took it and the other is when we went door to door. I could do sales now. If you could knock on somebody's door, So these are the things I took away. What I didn't like was that if somebody went against them and you were disfellowed, even if it's your child, you can't talk to them. I mean, absolutely horrible. I can't see how Jesus would. I'm raising my voice here, Michaela. I can't believe how Jesus would,
I don't
would
blame you.
want that. would want that. So
Hmm.
it's interesting
Yeah.
how religion can shape, and then of course we can't have this discussion without talking about the priests, millions of them, thousands, I don't know what the number is, molesting boys, right? We kind
Hmm.
of want to shuffle that under, but we can't. We shouldn't, because it should be
Hmm.
remembered. And whatever the reasons are is irrelevant. But again, what I like about religion is that generally it brings community, right? People kind of get
Mm-hmm.
together, but there's lots of negative. And there's people talking about each other. Why weren't you there? And this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
with everything, there's good and bad. There's people who abuse and there's people who
Yeah.
don't.
It's true. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. And that's also part of why I want to do more than just my therapy work.
Hmm.
I'm working on creating even more content, and to support people towards a future where we can get those pros of religion, of community, without the cons. And you know yeah, it's people aren't going to be perfect, but unfortunately religion facilitates all the things you just described. Because even if we just look at the Bible, at this point I see the Bible as something that does have some, let's say, inspired truth in it, but also some destructive landmines in there.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's a problem when people have this all or nothing thinking of either all of it is the true word of God, or you know just set it all aside. Like, there are some good things in there which can also be found other places, which is a big
Hmm.
filter for me in finding what I believe to be true. Do I find this common thread in other areas? And there's a lot like that. But yeah, the Bible has so much that fuels these practices. So not only are there the scriptures that people can misinterpret or maybe correctly interpret. I don't know, I'm not a Bible scholar, but I've heard different arguments. But
Hmm.
there are passages that people use to discriminate against women, even against other races in the past. And the
Sure.
Bible was used to support slavery.
Yes.
But also these horrors of shunning people or abusing people,
Hmm.
that's the result, even from a therapy view, that I recognize because of this idea of sin. Facilitates this shame, it facilitates this hiding, and then we're fueling these parts of ourselves that just take over even more strongly in these atrocious ways.
Yeah. Well said, Michaela. What is the difference between being a therapist and being a coach?
So in therapy, I'm using only um, the modalities, the evidence-based modalities, and it's a lot more of like open-ended questions.
Hmm.
Whereas in coaching, there is a little more freedom to give more direct advice and homework. In therapy, there's homework too, like do this worksheet for IFS or CBT or whatever the case might be, if the client's open to it. But, in coaching, it might be more of, check out this resource that addresses what you're looking at. In therapy, you're not so much as coaching them to get towards a specific goal, but giving them space to kind of explore, but only within, the tools of the evidence-based modality that are being used. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Hey, Joey Pinz here. Want to take your podcast experience to the next level? I'm excited to invite you to become a YouTube member. It's the absolute best way to support the channel and enhance your connection. Join our amazing community and unlock the incredible perks, custom loyalty badges, exclusive emojis, and priority comment replies. Your voice will always stand out. Be the first to watch new videos with early access, receive special membership shoutouts, and get exclusive behind-the-scenes photos and updates. Dive into content available only to our members, special videos, deep dives, and insider perspectives. Engage directly with me. Suggest podcast topics you want to hear, and even get personalized video shoutouts. Hit the join button right now and become part of something special. Let's build this amazing community together. I can't wait to welcome you as a new member. Join the Joey Pinz family today. I'm fortunate. I get to speak to many therapists, many coaches here on the podcast. And somebody said, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, but somebody said, therapists go back, coaches go forward.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Um, I've seen it done both ways in both areas, honestly. For
Hmm.
both coaches and therapists going, some coaches go back, some therapists only
Hmm.
look at what's ahead. And that's why it's so important, I think, whether you're considering a therapist or a coach, to find someone that's a fit for you. And if you're
Right.
working with someone that's not feeling like a fit, you know, keep searching, because some people need that. Some people need to heal the past in order to move forward into the future. Some people aren't ready for that, or maybe they've done that healing. I mean, I would argue if we've really done that healing, we would be able to move forward towards the future without issue, honestly.
Hmm.
But, for myself as a therapist, initially I was focusing more on the future, actually. But now with IFS, it's not like we're spending the whole session just talking about the past, not by any means. But we are looking at healing some of the past for some of the duration of the session, in order to liberate those parts of our brain, of our system, that are stuck in the past, because that is literally a big factor in us doing the things we don't want to be doing, or feeling the ways we don't want to be feeling, is unhealed trauma from the past.
Hmm. Something a little kind of close to my heart, Michaela. What is blisscipline?
Hmm. Yeah, discipline is practicing, discipline, but from a place of joy. So if it's, let's say there's something I really want to do, such as, let's say, like exercise regularly. If I'm engaging in discipline, I might push myself to do that, whether, I feel like it or not. And I might use some kind of harsh strategies to get myself to do that. Whereas blisscipline, it still involves that element of push. I might not feel like it, but I'm extra focused on finding that motivation from a place of joy or love. So,
Hmm.
really prioritizing my mindset around it. I might acknowledge, like, I don't feel like doing this today. And, I love myself so much that I will commit to what I said I'd do for myself. And I know I'm going to feel better. And so I'm going to do that. And, maybe I'd even make some adjustments, like, you know, maybe do something a little different that'll make it a little bit more fun, or something along those lines. But blisscipline is about the active discipline, but with more emphasis on the emotional state around it. And that facilitates more discipline, because your system recognizes it not as some punishment, but as a joy.
Hmm. Hmm. I'll come back to that shortly. Do you feel that you have had religious trauma?
It's interesting because for the longest, I didn't think I had any trauma.
Right.
It makes me crack up now. But yeah, I thought, I just was blind. And because honestly, even with everything, like, I saw it as a huge grief. What I went through with losing religion, I saw it as like the most painful thing I went through. Like, I recognized all that, but I didn't recognize it as trauma in the past. Now looking back, I because trauma is what leaves a mark, and not all traumatic events leave a mark, so to speak. Impact how we feel and think going into the future in like a negative way. So for me, yes, there is religious trauma, but it's different from most people's. A lot of people have the trauma of not feeling accepted or good enough, or
Hmm.
fear of hell. And, I
Hmm.
definitely have struggled with the not good enough piece. But I was very quick to shove that away when I left religion, because my goal was to have the most happy life I could have. And, I couldn't have religion to help me with that. I was going to do whatever else I could, which has led me to therapy and all of that, but also a lot of mindset training around, trying to practice self-love and self-acceptance and different things like that. But yeah, I have my own version of it, my own flavor of it.
So, Michela, when you're no two stories are the same, certainly, but when you're working with somebody who has religious trauma, I mean, do you have to? Oh, I sigh. I mean, that's a burden. I mean, how, do you deconstruct? Do you open up? I mean, how do you help?
Yeah. Yeah, it can be very heavy for some
Yes,
people.
yes, because
And
it's their faith. It's not. I don't
mhm,
want to compare terrible things, but I mean, if a partner's unfaithful, that's one thing. But when your whole life is based on something that you're living your life by, and what's going to happen in your afterlife, it's a bigger weight than something smaller. Again, I don't want to compare pains, but I mean, it's a big
mhm.
issue.
Oh
If
yeah.
God betrays you, who else? What could be bigger than that? Right?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I totally resonate with that cuz
Yeah.
that was my part of the trauma.
Mm,
Losing my whole worldview, literally. Like
right.
this is
Right.
how I
Your
saw the
worldview.
world.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that anymore. And that was very difficult. And for a lot of people that I work with who have the religious trauma, you know, a lot of it too is the loss of community.
Mm,
Um, a big thing is, the whole like, not feeling good enough because of those standards, and also fear around even exploring what is true because of the whole I got it wrong before, how can I trust anything now? That was big for me. It was huge for me. But the way I try to help, the way, I'm able to support these people is through firstly digesting emotion. And this is
mm,
something that I think is starting to be talked about more, but historically hasn't been given enough weight, is our need to process. And so a lot of people fear this idea because they think, "Oh, I'm just going to get stuck in it. I'm going to just,
mm,
succumb to depression or grief or whatever the case might be if I let myself go there." But there are tools. There are tools that keep it from being this long ongoing process and instead an efficient process. So, mainly the tool is to feel it, not think about it. And often that's not what's happening. Often we are kind of feeling it. Obviously, we're feeling it some degree. We notice we don't feel good. We don't like how we feel, but really we're absorbed in the mind. We're reliving the past. We're judging ourselves or others. We're narrating our opinion. We're maybe even thinking about how this is going to impact our future. Whereas instead, if you're truly, some say feel to heal, if you're doing that work, your attention is on your body. And
mm,
how does my body actually experience this sensation of sadness, grief, fear, anger? What is my body doing? And
mm,
focusing on whatever you're noticing there. Could be, you know, that knot in your stomach. It could be a lot of energy in your limbs, like you want to run or punch something. It could be a rapid heartbeat. It could be a weight on your chest. There's all kinds of ways it can express, but noticing what's happening and then allowing it to be there. So just opening yourself up to the experience of, I feel this sadness, I feel this anger, I feel this fear,
mm,
whatever it is.
mm,
And also hugely impactful is breathing deeply as you're focusing on the body and letting yourself feel that emotion.
mm,
There's this way of breathing I learned from this guy, Brian D. Ridgway, that, he calls level 5 breathing. I call it, with my therapy clients, especially, deep cyclical belly breathing, because that's, really what it is. And I'm not going to bring spiritual terms into therapy. But you're breathing in through the nose, pushing out the belly, which creates just optimal space in the torso for as much air to fill it as possible. So you're pushing out the belly as you breathe in through the nose, filling yourself up as much as possible with air. and then contracting the belly and exhaling out through the mouth. And something I really encourage is with this exhale to breathe out as if you're fogging up a mirror. It can, of course, be effective if you just breathe out like you're blowing out through a straw. But personally, I've found for myself and many of my clients that shift from like blowing out as like it's a straw versus breathing out like you're fogging up a mirror seems to bring more relaxation and relief of the sensation. But you're not trying to force the feeling to go away. You're not trying to force the emotion to go away. You're really trying to focus on accepting and allowing the experience of the emotion, letting yourself feel it. And when we just let ourselves feel it, it runs its course and, we're done. Like
Good
it's
cry.
possible. Yeah, yeah. But, again, even with that, if depending on where the mind is, we might need a good cry over and over and over again. But if we're focused on accepting and feeling, the sadness and focusing on the body versus, because, an analogy I use a lot is like logs of wood. So, our emotions are like these logs of wood. And the more we take on through life without burning them, the more we're carrying, the more we're burdened. But if we feel them, that's like burning the log. And if we burn it away, we're relieved. We have less of a load to bear. But if we're thinking, we're creating more logs and we're just making it this never-ending process. So yeah, we're still thinking, but we're thinking about the body, not the past or future, not a narrative or judgment. We're accepting and allowing. So that's a huge part of my work. And I, again, got this through that teacher. My other piece is IFS, which, I can address too if you're interested.
Well, I have friends of friends who left like the Mormon church specifically, and what seems to happen there is that they fall prey to a lot of uh they're so open accepting because that's the community they were in, that they so fall prey to like multi-level marketing and these kinds of scams, I'll call them, right? They're just susceptible to that. Whereas I think somebody like yourself or others who actually had religious trauma have a hard time trusting at that point because they feel betrayed. So in order to come to somebody like yourself who's a practitioner or a therapist, they're going to have to open up that trust to you a little bit. So you have to probably first break that barrier before you can do anything else.
Yeah. And that's why, I'm working on my content more to help people know me more, to
Mm,
feel trusting, if they feel
mm,
like I am trustworthy. Now, in
right.
therapy, when I have a client in therapy who comes to me and has religious trauma, the way I build trust there is building the rapport as a therapist and focusing on whatever they're bringing to the table. And usually it's not their religious trauma at the beginning, even if it's like a huge issue in their life. And it's probably for the reasons you just described. But what I've
Mm.
seen is that as we work through other traumas and more like, current crises of their mental health, eventually that starts to come up, the topic of spirituality, and the trust is there by then, and we're able to work on that.
Amazing.
But this
Takes a
idea of
remarkable person.
trust, if I
Yeah,
may,
please.
this is something that, like I said, was a huge issue for me. And that internal family systems therapy has helped me so much with because
Mm,
exactly you described. How can I trust when
right.
I was so misled?
The
Especially,
universe betrayed
yeah,
me. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And, within my time in Christianity, I knew thousands of people who believe this to be completely true. I knew of doctors and researchers, scientists, very smart people who also said the same things. And I, would read their books and I thought I had all the proof to believe it. And then boom, I was like, I
Amazing.
can't believe this. This is not true.
Amazing. Amazing.
And so, yeah, it was very hard to trust even myself. Like I didn't even trust myself. But through internal family systems therapy, I was working with a therapist on this. I had actually done some training myself as a therapist in IFS, and I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. I want to find my own therapist in IFS. So I did. And through working with her and exploring more of this idea of the self, it really hit me that the self sounded just like the Holy Spirit that I was taught about in religion. And that really got me thinking, because I'm like, if this science-based therapeutic model, nothing to do with Christianity, the founder of it had nothing to do with Christianity. If they're talking about some energy within us that sounds just like the Holy Spirit, maybe there's something actually there that, Christianity is just interpreting in their own way. And again, this is evidence-based to really work in transforming people's lives and heal them. And I've seen like magical stuff. And so that really helped me, like, okay, like I don't trust, like I would struggle to trust myself, little s self, this self energy, capital S self. Okay, I have this within me. And if I help my parts, I can access the self. And that is something that I can trust. And part of IFS work is helping your parts learn to trust the self within and learn to access the self, which comes through, honestly, this isn't part of IFS. They have other modes too, but what I just described earlier, when we allow ourselves to regulate through feeling and digesting our emotions and coming to a place of peace, that's where we have more of a connection with what you could call the self. Some people even call it intuition. But the fact that, again, I was seeing this this cord running through different topics, Christianity, therapy, it got me really thinking, and it really helped me to learn to trust myself. Yeah, I don't trust my fear. I don't trust, my anger, my sadness, but I do trust my capital S self, and that is within me. And when I regulate and tune into that and listen to my body, which is also a huge shift from my past, I was so disconnected from my body, I didn't even realize it. But when we learn to be in tune, and that there is something within that can be trusted, that is love, in my opinion, yeah, we can heal that trust wound.
It takes a remarkable person to go through all that and learn from it and then try to help others, Michela. I applaud you for that. Has there been anything in the last month or so that you changed your mind on?
Hmm. So that's a good
Anything.
question.
Nothing, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be profound.
Mm-hmm. Anything in the last month or so that I've changed my mind on? It's interesting because sometimes your mind can be made, and yet it's still not clicking.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've had that
Yeah,
experience,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
But, what I can say about the last month, I'm looking at the date, this past month has been a little bit of a whirlwind because my husband and I went back to Italy to
Nice.
visit family recently. And so there was travel and all of that. But, what I have noticed as a shift in this last month is my true practice of, or at least further in it, of that self acceptance. Because again, there is
Hmm.
this history of we need to be shamed into action. That's a big part of a lot of versions of Christianity, pushing the fact that you are, such a dirty sinner, and you need to do good to honor God. Um, a lot of shame is used to fuel motivation, fuel the discipline. But something I'm really working on is to be loving and kind to myself, because to be honest, Jay, I've been doing this work for almost a year and a half, with going public and trying to help people further beyond therapy. And for the vast majority of the time, I felt like I was running on a hamster wheel, you
Hmm.
know, doing my best to be productive, and yet hardly seeing results. And my health was like plummeting. So even though I was trying to do things to take care of my health while I was at it. But the emotional stress of feeling like I wasn't doing enough, I'm behind, I'm not good enough, da 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 da, that was really taking a toll. So it's actually been since May or June that I've really been trying to be more loving and accepting for myself. And, it's taken time for that really to set in. It feels like that's happening. Like I'm much more able to be accepting towards myself. And just as I suspected, with that self love and acceptance, I'm even more motivated to do the
Hmm.
things that I want to do. But now it's from this place of want, and I'm more inspired and I'm more able to enjoy, my exercise, my food choices, my content creation versus before feeling the stress even as I'm doing it, even if it's something I do enjoy. So
Hmm.
that's been a shift lately.
Hmm. So, Michaela, I started my business in the 90s and I was working way too hard and I was not paying attention to myself, my physical self, and eating poorly, etc. And so I'm in front of the doctor. I'm at 340 pounds. He tells me I had gained all this terrible weight. And she said, if you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. So my daughter was just born and scared the life out of me. And spent the next 6, 7 months, lost about 120 pounds, kept it off, And so when Mike tell people this, their first reaction is, what's your secret? What you do? And I say, there's no secret, just discipline, right? So, motivation, focus, willpower. So given your background, how does discipline play a role in your life and in the light of blisscipline?
Mm. Yeah, those are great questions. Discipline, I have an interesting relationship with discipline
Mm,
because, when I was religious, I I was quite disciplined. I was very disciplined, I would say. I
define.
even even though my parents weren't the most strict Christian parents by any means, I would put rules on myself because I
Hmm,
had these goals of experiencing God more and feeling more connected to God and all these different things. I would read these books about being set apart, like making yourself different to show whose you are and things like that.
hmm,
So, I would only listen to Christian music, only read Christian books. Um, you know, and yet I would struggle so much when it came to food. I remember learning about binge eating disorder. I heard about binging at some point. Oh, yeah, I know why, because I don't know if you're familiar with this. Um, there was this woman who made this religious diet called the Way Down Diet. And it was about basically trusting God with your food, I guess.
whoa.
It was about, honestly, there were some good things to it. But again, because of, unfortunately, religion, the Bible, really, it turned into something really toxic. There's actually a documentary out about it that
Hmm,
even Chrissy Teigen made or produced. But it was about listening to your body, only eating when you're hungry and stopping when you were full. And there was a time where my family was doing that, really focused on that, watching her videos. And then, we all kind of fell away from that. And I had learned about binging from that series, from those teaching lessons. And as I got further into my teenage years, like that became my coping mechanism.
hmm,
It was like something I would binge if I was upset. I would also binge if I was happy. It was like how I was able to express my emotions. And yet there was so much shame because in my head I'm not honoring God by not honoring my body. I also had all this shame as like, a teenage girl in our society wanting to be more thin and all these things. And I also was very disciplined doing some extreme diets. Um,
hmm,
but, over time, I I had suffered enough. And so I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to try this really weird thing that I think is absolutely ridiculous, but that my dad told me about. And I'm going to try to love myself.
hmm.
Because I think this was after my dad, you know, so he became atheist, but that was very short lived. Then he
Right.
became spiritual outside of religion and got into all kinds of stuff. And one day he was telling me about this idea of like, looking in the mirror and saying that you love yourself. And I thought that was the dumbest thing ever. Like, on one hand, my brain was saying, like, you don't need to love yourself. Like, why should I love myself? Like, God loves me. Like, that's all that matters. Like,
Mm.
that sounds egotistical, or it felt wrong to some degree. I also thought it was really dumb and weird. But I'd suffered enough, and I'm like, screw it, I'm going to try this, especially as I was like losing my connection to Christianity and all of that. And so, yeah, I started practicing that. I started giving myself compliments and saying I love myself. And it really changed things for me. It really did make a difference. But as I, went through, the years, um, there have still been some of those challenges with discipline, which is why, especially this year, I've decided to focus so much on blisscipline. So I'm starting first with how I feel, prioritizing that. For you, I'd be curious your thoughts on this, but from what you shared, it sounds like your motivation was to be with your daughter. And so what I hear in that is you were motivated, by love. Yes, there was fear as well, fear of not being with her, but fear trumps love, every time when it's in the equation,
Mm.
especially if we lean into that. And I'm sure you did, living with your daughter, just seeing her, whatever the case might be. So yeah, as I work on practicing blisscipline, I'm really focusing on what really matters to me. So, like, even when it comes to healing the conditions that have developed, some I've had through my life that I've always ignored, some have come up through the stress of the last year that I've put on myself. I'm really focusing on my nervous system. I'm really seeking to stay regulated, to feel that peace, love, and joy. And from there, again, do these things that actually excite me and bring me joy, that some might say is discipline, such as, eating in a certain way, or exercising, or, getting work done. But there's a big shift depending on where you're coming from. And one thing I'll also say, based on not just my history, but my research, as a therapist, my work with clients with eating disorders, because that's another one of my specialities. I see so much value in starting where you can and being kind to yourself and letting it grow from there. And I think it's amazing that you were able to create the transformation that you did. It sounds to me like, through my lens, it sounds to me like there was either a part of you that, perhaps even was motivated by the fear or the love, or again, the mix, that was able to stay in charge with this discipline. Or maybe it was even yourself. I'm not sure. But I know for a lot of people, when we try to be disciplined, there is like a sabotage part that
Mm.
becomes stronger and takes over. And that's why, 99%, maybe even higher than that, of diets don't work. People lose weight, but
They're
then they gain it
temporary.
back in more.
Yeah.
So it's less even about just discipline, in my opinion, and more about mindset and more about emotional state. And so that's something I really focus on when it comes to creating change.
Hmm. Want to show your love for discipline, inspiration, and the Joey Pinz podcast? Now's your chance. Introducing the brand new Joey Pinz merch store, where style meets discipline. Choose from premium apparel, cozy hoodies, stylish hats, durable bags, and your new favorite coffee mug, all featuring the iconic Joey Pinz logo. Perfect for podcast fans, discipline enthusiasts, or as unique gifts for friends and family. Every purchase supports the Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations podcast, helping us continue to inspire greatness and promote positive change. Visit joeypins.com/store today and wear your discipline proudly. Joey Pinz merch. Wear it, share it, and live it. It's amazing to me how there's no right answer to, how discipline plays a role in your life. Everybody looks at it. I've done over 700, episodes, and everybody answers it differently. It's
Mm.
wonderful. So right now, Michaela, what motivates you? Given everything that we've talked about, where you are in your life, what's your motivation right now?
Hmm. Honestly, at the root of it, I would say my motivation is my desire for peace, love, and joy. That
Mm,
that really is, my motivation. It's why I'm seeking to do things differently in my own personal life. It's honestly the fuel even behind what I'm trying to do publicly. And because something I also learned, this was from a teacher, Aaron Abke. He was talking about how the things we want, we don't actually want those things. What we really want is to feel, peace, love, and joy. Because if we
mm,
got those things and it made us depressed all the time, we wouldn't want it anymore. So it's
right.
not about the thing, it's about the feeling it'll give us. And I'm focusing on that more and more, which is helping me to detach from expectations and whatnot,
Hmm.
and instead create more of that sense of safety in my nervous system to allow me to do more of these things that excite me and bring interest for me.
So when you say peace, love, and joy, is it for you? Is it for your family, your community, the world, the country, the state?
So
What's the
I
scope?
desire I desire all of that. But my
Mm,
focus and my motivation is for me.
I see.
Because I do believe that, and I've seen in my own life and in hundreds of clients, because yeah, I'm a young therapist, but before I did my therapy clinical work, I was working as a behavioral healthcare manager with like hundreds of clients on my roster at a time. So I've worked with hundreds of people, and I see this all the time, that when we're so focused on pleasing others or even helping others to our own detriment, we create more suffering ultimately. Because how can we continue to do good if we are driving ourselves into the ground? And
Mm,
also, it keeps us from being who we
hmm,
really want to be. If we're so focused on helping others and not taking care of ourselves,
mm,
this is why, this is very common with moms. I'll use that as an example. So focused on their kids, not focused on themselves. I love my mom to death. She's an amazing, wonderful mom, but I've seen this in my own family as well. So focused on the family, not focused on themselves.
right.
And again, even with my clients, etc., they'll report to me, I want so badly to be such a good mom, and I'm screaming at my kids, or I don't have the energy to even get up in the morning. I'm in so much pain. I can hardly even take care of things at home. These are the ways that the body shows us how we're on the wrong path when we're not taking care of ourselves. We become emotionally reactive, or we undergo autoimmune disorders. And this is more supported by science too, that so many
Hmm.
chronic pains and autoimmune disorders are the result of unprocessed trauma. It gets stored in the body. And, this is one way the body's like, hey, let's take care of this. Let's get rid of all this weight we're carrying. It doesn't get rid of it, but it's trying to get our attention so that we do. So even though I truly am the person who desires that peace, love, and joy across the board, but also with my spiritual belief in oneness, not only do I believe practically that focusing on peace, love, and joy for myself will help me better do what I can for the world, but in this belief in oneness, I believe even in ways beyond what I understand, it can help the world even beyond what I can physically do as I'm taking care of these things for myself.
Hmm. So, given the motivation of peace, love, and joy, Michaela, how do you measure success?
By how I'm feeling. And that's been a huge shift. That's been a huge shift. And this is also what's so beautiful and wonderful for me being in the spirituality I have now. What I'm experiencing now is what I was so pained to lose when I left religion, but that I now realize I can have even without religion. And that's
Hmm.
trust, not feeling the need to be in control. Of course, I have my moments, but I'm not focusing on success in like material or numeric ways. I'm more focusing on how I'm feeling and
Hmm.
trusting that when I'm at my best, the success will come. Because, like I said, Jay, I worked so hard trying to make success happen. And it was hardly getting me anywhere. And my health was suffering more and more. And I was like, I can't keep doing this. I'm not going to keep doing this. It's not getting me anywhere anyway. Let me just
Hmm.
focus on me. And I've been seeing that. It's crazy and cool, how things can just flow when you trust and your heart's in the right place and you're not trying to force. It's beautiful.
But that, Michaela, takes continuous inventorying, right? You got to inventory yourself to see if you're feeling good, right? I mean, there's effort and perhaps peace in that as well.
That's a very good point. It does require effort initially, and
Right.
this was the case for me. Like, noticing how I feel, that's
Hmm.
foreign for a lot of people, and it was for
Hmm.
me too. I was, again, so blind to even how I felt. Like, I remember many times where family members would tell me, like, Michaela, quit worrying. And I'm like, I'm not worrying. I'm fine.
Hmm.
But looking back, I can see how maybe I didn't think I was worrying, but in my body, there was this tension, there was this fear. And consciously, I was trying to just ignore it and be fine. But that wasn't actually, my experience. So it has taken practice to question within, what am I feeling? Because especially when we're led by parts, our parts are just trying to keep us from either dying or suffering. But they don't have access to the conscious rational brain, if we're looking at this in medical terms, the prefrontal cortex. And if we're looking at this a little deeper, our parts aren't self. And self is what has, perspective and patience and compassion and curiosity, etc. So, our parts are very outwardly focused. They're like, what's going to hurt me? How can I avoid it? What are they feeling? How can I navigate that so that I'm okay? Often our parts are very outwardly focused. And so it has taken practice to learn to notice how I feel. So initially there has been some effort, but the way we work is that we have brains with neuroplasticity, which means they can change. No matter what our habits are, we can change. We're not confined to our habits. It does take effort to notice when we're on that path of doing something the way we used to do it and being like, oh, I don't want this, I'm going to choose differently.
Hmm.
And as you choose differently, that creates a new neural pathway in your brain, and the more you practice making that other choice, whether it's a thought, an action, breathing when you feel something versus trying to push it away, whatever it is, that strengthens that new neural pathway. And the less we use that old neural pathway, the brain actually starts to prune it away.
Hmm.
So initially it can take effort, but eventually it becomes the new normal.
Hmm. Well, again, I repeat, Michaela. I mean, it's one thing. The trait of a remarkable person is one thing. One, going through this trauma and then just living with it. But the remarkable person turns it around and tries to stop others from going through it or helping others to better recover from it. And that's what you're doing. And I applaud you for that. And I think it's absolutely wonderful and admirable. Anybody, thank you so much for your time today. Grazie mille. So, anybody listening or watching, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I am on pretty much all social medias as Michaela's Mind Munchies. Just love sharing my thoughts and focusing on these topics. So yeah, I'm on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and I'm also on Facebook as Michela Giordano Castro. Yeah, you can contact me in any of those areas.
Michaela's Mind Munchies. I'll make sure to put it in the show notes. Michaela, I thank you so much for your time. Next time I'm in the greater Houston area, perhaps you, your husband, and I will get together for a cup of tea or some limoncello or something.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much for everything today. It's been a
You be
pleasure.
well.
You too. Take care.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.